Now it's like we are all sentenced to freedom. People think that they want choices, but what they actually want is good defaults. If everyone shut down their phones on Saturday, I would have no issue shutting mine down. But I don't want to shut down my phone knowing that Anna may...
the game theory is rigged against you.
Once the essay is published, I think one of the most valuable artifacts is actually being able to share the raw material that inspired the work. Because I think so much of the internet is performative. It's sometimes more interesting to see not just what you think, but how you arrive at what you think.
You know, I feel like what I'm trying to do from the outside, you're doing from the inside, and it's so beautiful. And Sublime and Interact are like sisters. Welcome back, everybody, to the Hope Accents. Today, my guest is one of the prodigies of technology, a well-kept secret in some circles and a complete obvious and very mimetic creator in other circles, Sari Azout, founder and CEO of Sublime, but so much more. Trendsetter, investor, writer, editor-in-chief and founder of a magazine. Welcome to the Hope Axis. We are so privileged to have you.
Oh my gosh, what a great intro. I'm so intimidated. Now I have to live up to that.
It's okay. People already know this. We can just be ourselves after this. This was just like what you've done until now.
Exactly.
We had a conversation before you guys joined us with Sari about just using this time as founders therapy. We are both solo founders, female founders working in the consumer space, but trying to do something way more than just creating another gambling app or mindless scrolling app or running app. We're trying to save people's souls in our own ways. Myself with Interact, trying to give literacy back to people and the self-confidence to host events, read books, to feel like a well-versed participant in society and in culture. And Sublime is trying to hack the brain. Do you maybe want to tell us a little bit about how, you know, I feel like what I'm trying to do from the outside, you're doing from the inside, and it's so beautiful. And Sublime and Interact are like sisters. Do you maybe want to share a few thoughts about this?
I don't think we've actually spoken at length about this, but I do feel like Sublime and Interact are trying to, are like taking kind of the same challenges and like interpreting it in different ways. And I think like you and I both are people that I would describe as in love with ideas. We just believe in the power of ideas. And I think we look around us and we say like, ideas are the most powerful vehicle to change the world. But what are the kind of mediums that we're using today to communicate ideas? You know, if you think about like the history of the world and, you know, in the beginning, it was like oral culture and everything was passed down through stories and speech. And then we kind of, when we lost it, it was lost forever. And then there was writing, and then there was the printing press, and, you know, and then there was the internet. And like, I think we've sort of like assumed that the current state of the internet is sort of like, inevitable, right? That this is the way that people are supposed to share ideas, that we distill things down to 10 seconds. And if you cannot convey something in 10 seconds, that it, you know, that if something is like stripped of nuance, that the things have to be stripped of nuance to be communicated. There's all these kind of challenges with the way that we've built this idea environment, starting with the fact that everything is quantifiable. And so, you know, the moment that you put ideas to like the, you know, the numbers game, that's just going to skew the kinds of things that can get numbers, not the kinds of things that are, you know, what
gets measured gets improved.
Right. And it's like the optimized is often at odds with interesting and, you know, informative. And anyway, so I think like, not to get like, you asked me about Sublime and I already went like on a tangent, but I think we both look at this and we think like, what can we uniquely do about this? And I think for me, I am someone that loves kind of like, there is nothing that I love more than being in flow state with an idea where I am collecting and connecting nuggets of inspiration and seeing patterns. And that is actually the opposite of, so like on social media, it's compulsive, it's reactive, it's immediate. Whereas what I'm describing is the opposite. It's reflective. It's not in the here and now, it's in the long now. And so it's, I think that like the challenge with that is that I was doing all of that in very solitary environments, right? Whether I'm doing this in like Apple Notes or Google Docs or Notion, it's like I am already collecting in my like notebooks all of these interesting ideas and raw materials and curating collections of thoughts that will then become essays and conferences. And so I guess the spark for me with Sublime was, can I build a tool that allows me to do this in the best possible way that feels equal parts personal and communal? And where we landed is basically like a tool that I think is both practical and philosophical. Practical meaning like a lot of people find us on Reddit. They don't care what I think, what my philosophy of the internet and the world is. They just happen to think Sublime is very simple, like a really good, smart AI-powered tool to search and collect and connect ideas. But if you really care about the future of the internet, the kind of philosophical underpinning of the tool is really, I would say, like summed up as, we really want to usher in this transition from hijacking your attention to deepening your intention, right? So if I think about the state of the web today, like I go on Twitter, which I'm like extremely guilty of. I'm a very anxious person, and Twitter is like a tool to quiet and quell my anxiety for even just like a few seconds, many times a day. I think there's a difference between, I'm anxious, I don't know what to do with myself, I need to fill 5 seconds of time because I cannot stare at a blank wall, and versus like the struggle of being like, oh, I had saved all these ideas on Sublime about being unLLMable. Let me kind of start there, and what else can I discover that's related to this and bring it to my plot of land here? And sort of, so I think for me, ultimately, I will have succeeded if I help people consume or create more than they consume.
It's a little bit like anti-social media, right? Claire Lehman was on this podcast a couple of months ago, and she had to leave Twitter for a period. I don't know if you remember this, because somebody was launching a kind of harassment campaign against her. And, you know, she has a very big Instagram following, and she has her own magazine, you know, landing in people's inboxes. So she was like, fine. She had her own coverage, and she thought, you know, I'll just bugger off Twitter for a little bit, see what happens. And I think she was off Twitter for 6 months or so. And she talks on my podcast about how her nervous system kind of regenerated in that period, like how your nervous system calms down. And I never feel this on Sublime. Like I never feel agitated or provoked. I like to kind of compare the experience with the Met when you're in the Greek section and there are all these timeless white marble sculptures, and you just look at them and they're cool and bright, and it's just like the timelessness that feeling, even though you know that they used to be painted and this is not how they used to be. And so, but it also has to do something with the kind of flow state, the fake flow state where you're just flowing things through yourself and you don't remember any of it, versus the kind of flow state where you're flowing toward the creation or the logging of something. Because
where you're wrestling with something.
Sublime is also like a personal pinboard, right? Like you want to hold on to those things.
Totally. I mein, it is a tool to save everything interesting you come across and then create something with those things. But I think, one of the things that you mentioned, like the feeling, and I think the reason we named the company Sublime is because the thing that I'm most excited about when people tell me like, you know, what's your goal? And I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of like there's this feeling that I want to nail. And the term sublime is like, it captures, or really like, if you think about what the term sublime is, if you're standing at the top of a mountain overlooking this like beautiful scenery, this feeling of being equal parts extremely overwhelmed and in awe because you feel powerless, like I am nothing, but also I am everything. You know, the feeling of like
little Edmund Burke for everyone.
So that's the idea. I think the you mentioned like Claire and like regulating her nervous system. I think the irony of all of it is that to get Sublime off the ground, I need to be so present on social media, you know.
I'm the same with interns. Like we're kind of the anti-Twitter, but we have to be on Twitter to tell people about the anti-Twitter. And then you're like, how does this work? How do you reconcile those two things in your?
I don't. It's it's a work in progress. So one of the things that I have started, because I think I used to be very cynical about this. And now I am sort of at the point where I'm like, complaining is boring. If I have if I believe that what I'm building is important and powerful, then I need to solve for distribution. I can't like stand on this like moral high ground or high horse and say like, oh, this is so cringe, or I can't, like, I'm too good for that. So I think I haven't like figured out a way to kind of be myself in a way that I think still corresponds with the kind of nature of like the mediums of today, right? I think today so much of success hinges on, do you have a good short form, like viral TikTok reel strategy? I don't have that. I've never done a single like short form TikTok. It's not my flavor of like, like content, but I also think like that's my job, is to figure out how to tell this story and communicate it. And I can sit here and complain about the state of social media, or I can be like, no, I mean, how do I like build this megaphone for myself to so that, because I think social media is a great place to dip into to find ideas, and Sublime is a great place to go back to workshop those ideas. And so I actually think they work. I don't advocate for getting rid of social media. I advocate for like like changing the ratio of your consumption to creation. But anyway, my relationship to social media is unresolved at this point.
I think nobody has figured it out, including seemingly the people who work there and who own these platforms. They seem very conflicted about a bunch of things about their own platform. It's so interesting to me how you tweeted this thing this morning or a couple of hours ago, and I think this corresponds beautifully to what you just said. You're talking about how, if I'm going to paraphrase, this is just from my memory, that for you, the ideas are not the problem. Your bottleneck is explaining your ideas clearly, because you're building something new, because you're building something that might remind people of other things, but it's not those other things. So you don't want people to lock in their brains that other, type of media. You're building your own thing. And, I definitely have a similar problem with Interact. Sometimes people tell me things about Interact that we've never said, and it never even occurred to me to explain to people that we're not that. How do you have you devised a strategy? I mean, everything you do is so refined, so eloquent, so, boiled down to the essence. So it surprised me that you would say that, but I'm curious, where are you on that journey right now? Or what do you think remains unsaid that you're struggling to explain?
I'm going to butcher the exact tweet, but it was something along the lines of like the bottleneck for me is my ability to express myself clearly. And I think that we live right now we're in a period of time basically where the bottleneck to building anything great is making people care. Like you basically are starting off with a default of nobody cares, and your job is to make them care. And you have to make them care in an environment where literally the cure for cancer could be in a tweet and you would just scroll past it, right? So how do you, so it's not enough to kind of meander and just like word vomit my way into what I need to say. I need to not only say the right things, but say them in 100 different ways over and over again. It's almost like back in the day, it's like, don't tell anyone your idea because they'll steal it. And it's like, no, tell everyone your idea because you're going to have to shove it down people's throats until like before, like, like people, like it starts to actually click with people. That's sort of the world we're in. And that's why you see companies like Cluely go viral, because it's like, it doesn't even matter what the product is. What matters is their ability to spark some controversy, because the scarcity is attention. And so, so I guess like I'm sort of like, I was thinking out loud about that tension, right? Of how do you kind of generate attention in ways that feel aligned with my soul? I don't want to have to spark some sort of controversy for the sake of controversy in order to go viral. I think like I am much more interested in kind of a slow burn, in like a like slowly compounding value. I think my strategy with Sublime is very much like an exist strategy. Everyone talks about an exit strategy. For me, it's like, how do I make this exist for decades?
You want an entrance strategy.
Basically.
So interesting. I think Liv Bory tweeted a couple of days ago about how she believes that the hypes will die down and integrity will be back on vogue. Is that something you agree with? And if so, what does it mean to have integrity as a startup founder in 2025? I'm asking myself as I'm asking you.
Listen, I think I think when we think about there's such a disconnect between our stated preferences and our revealed preferences. I mean, the number of tweets and posts on social media about hating social media, it's the most hypocritical thing, right? It's like we love to say that we hate it. We love to say like Twitter, bring back the following feed by default because I hate my For You feed and I don't want the algorithm to determine what I see. But then if you look at like the revealed preferences, it's like people are far more engaged in For You feeds. People like, no matter how much you can hate on social media, like tell me what you do and I'll tell you who you are. So it's, where you spend your time really kind of dictates what you value. So I think that I think that's going to still be a thing. The reality is that these tools prey on our deepest insecurities as humans, like the dopamine. I mean, I really do think that a phone is a device for muting the anxieties proper to being alive. And I don't think we're going to cure anxiety.
Fidget spinner, right? Phone is my fidget spinner.
It's your fidget spinner. And I mean, at the end of the day, like Sublime is amazing. We have an incredible community of devoted customers and users, but I'm not building and optimizing for the 5 seconds you're in line at Starbucks, and we've just been conditioned that we have to open our phone because we cannot stand in line at Starbucks for 5 seconds without doing anything. So I don't think,
it is joke in a Kimmy Schmidt when every 5 seconds somebody says, "Do you want a water?" And she's like, no, I can just like exist for 5 seconds without mineral water. Like my body was built for the desert. It's fine,
But I truly think it is very hard for me. I try to observe Shabbat on Saturday. It's extremely hard for me, but I really truly cannot be doing nothing. Like the how to do nothing, I don't know how to do nothing. And so social media
what
is
do you
weird.
do on Shabbat? Like, how do you, like, for those people listening here who might not be religious or are from another religion, but they want to take maybe a day off every self-mandated day off every week. What should they do?
It's I love up there.
You just like run around or try to meditate, or I mean, you can't even meditate because you can't listen to anything, right? That's not there in past.
I think there's like the strict Orthodox Shabbat rules, and then there's your kind of like, like to me, it's like no social media, but it's not like it's not drive a car, for example. So there are ways around it. I think what is so interesting about Shabbat, there was Ezra Klein had an episode. I forget who the guest was, but she was talking about how Shabbat in Israel, for example, is because so much of the country shuts down. It sort of feels like a mandated non-compete agreement, I think is how they stated it, which is like if everyone shut down their phones on Saturday, I would have no issue shutting mine down. But I don't want to shut down my phone knowing that anime.
The game theory is rigged against you. It's really interesting. I mean, this is why, for instance, OpenAI just took a whole week off as a company. And in Intellect as well, we do communal retreats when maybe it's 3 times a year, we do a long weekend and everybody leaves except like customer service and people who have to be on call. Because first of all, for 2 reasons. One, it's really hard to be off Slack, but all your colleagues are working, either because you have FOMO and you want to be in the good conversations, or you just don't want to leave them alone with a problem, right? Like if somebody like pings your Slack saying, "Where is XYZ?" and only you know it, you might not want to leave them hanging for 3 days. You will re-engage and then you see things and then your nervous system is back in that circulation. Oh, what a terrible metaphor, but like it's back in that kind of pace. And also because, you go offline and then when you come back, you are under this deluge of all the emails you didn't deal with, all the Slack. And so it's so good that, all your team members are off at the same time. And, whether it's Shabbat or not, I really recommend if anybody listening who has a team, a family, a small group that they manage where they can kind of institute a general strike sometimes. It's great. Totally. And then you really, like in Israel, sometimes Shabbat feels like a sudden street festival.
Totally.
Because you have to talk to people in person if you want to talk to them. So you will go to your neighbor,
Totally, totally. So I think maybe that is the advice. It starts small, right? It's like there was a survey that the National Bureau of Economic Research conducted where I think 50% of the respondents would say that, if everyone shut down social media, they would prefer if it didn't exist. Like they would prefer if social media did not exist at all. But because it exists, they feel the need to be there. So regardless of whether you trust the data or not, the point is you are not going to get like 6 billion people to coordinate. But you can get, I can get my group chat of like 5 good friends and their families and try to have a challenge where we shut down our devices on Saturdays and we make plans in advance. So I think so much of what I have learned just also in building Sublime, because I think maybe you and I share this, we are both really ambitious women. But I think like so much of like thinking big is starting small, right? And I think like I always the kind of framing that I've given my team is head in the clouds, feet on the ground. It's actually reflected on our site. We have our on our Sublime.app landing page. There's a head in the clouds view, which is our manifesto, and our feet on the ground, which is like, hey, this is like a practical tool that you will love because it's like so simple and powerful. And so I think it's like holding that tension. I think as we're building businesses and have like big dreams and ideas, it's how do you kind of like keep your head in the clouds but your feet on the ground?
I mean, this interact as well is true for us as well, changing the public arena, the public discourse, one conversation at a time, right? Because if you went at it kind of as a phalanx at the whole thing, you would be rebuffed immediately. But when you're creating slow social change where just people are kind of unlocked for this movement and they realize like, oh, you can have group conversations like this, like you can discuss this thing in this friendly tone, that that ethos, that realization of one's virtue will then feed into the next conversation, and it kind of like it's viral, it spreads, right? And nothing really tops experience. I think this is what Sublime is doing as well. Like you show, don't tell, right? Like you're almost not explained much on Sublime. It's a simple tool so people figure out how to use it. And you're immediately in the experience because that visceral download will leave a much stronger impression on the person than if they've read your long white paper about why this will be good.
Totally. I'm curious. I remember reading once that to build a consumer company, you have to kind of appeal to one of the 7 kind of like sins or whatever, whether it's like greed, envy. I forget what they all were. But I feel like for inner intellect, so much of it is like curiosity, right? And I feel like the metaphors that we've used to build the internet are over-indexed on those like those like 7 whatever, like I forget the exact ones, but I sort of and I don't think humans are any one thing. We are multidimensional. Like yes, we can be envious and greedy, but we can also be super curious. And it sort of matters what framing you choose for the products and experiences you build. But I'm curious, like what's been your experience? Because I mean, you obviously have incredible guests and experiences, but you have to overcome the inertia of I could just open my phone and scroll with zero friction. There is more friction to attending an event. And I'm curious, what is your relationship with what have you?
So interesting. I didn't know about the 7 sins. And I think it's probably a combination of things. I know about Nir Eyal's classification that there is the hunt, the tribe. Definitely intellect is the hunt. I think it's curiosity, but it's curious. It's an ambition expressed through curiosity. So I think people who are in intellect regularly, either because they are hosting events or they are in the community tier and they attend a lot of events as opposed to just like dropping by with a public ticket every once in a while, they are very sporty. Like it's more like a boot camp. So it's curiosity, but people who come into intellect, they come in the kind of neoclassical understanding of the humanities and of learning and multidisciplinarity, that they are interested in science and they are interested in society and history, and they are also interested in poetry, and they want to, like you talk about I think motherhood as an Everest, if I'm correct. Like there was this beautiful Instagram or tweet, I don't know, like from years ago from you. And I think that's similar for people developing an intellectual praxis. That it's not about getting there. Like you don't want to be like, okay, I've mastered this and now I'm going. Like that would be terrible. That would mean that one of the best things in your life is gone. What you want is you want to develop a praxis where you constantly unlock new levels, both for yourself and like understanding your own ideas, but also the more you know, the more useful you are in society. And I think intellect is for people who are seeking a kind of public utility for their knowledge. And they say, I might not have the best TikTok campaign or whatever, but here are all my ideas. Here are all the books I read, all the people I discuss things with on intellect. And I am in a system on intellect where I can like kind of like trickle it back into the pool and like give back to people who are coming after me. My very good friend Erica Robles Anderson always says, success is succession. Things that you do that have no afterlife are fails. Like you can win the best award, make the most money, be the most famous person in the world. No one cares. If you don't have succession, you're DOA. Right? Whatever you have that is succession, whether it's your child, whether it's the people who will take over your company when you retire, whether it's, a younger person that you teach or a newcomer that you teach, if you can reach a next high and with that give back more and then go even higher and give back more, you have succeeded. It doesn't matter what the world thinks. Because
I love the lesson. It reminds me of building a legacy versus building an empire. And there's just such a difference, I think, between just the orientation of wanting one or the other. It's interesting. I mean, one of the things that I've become an obsessive scholar of the consumer web, right? Everything from like studying social media to even just tools like Duolingo, right? Like making education about entertainment and the streaks and Duo. And, I don't like personally respond to that stuff, like to gamification in that way. It doesn't work on me, but obviously the numbers
I'm really scared of the owl. Like I have owl PTSD. Like if I see a green bird, I have memory Dickens. I'm still in therapy. Thank you, Duolingo.
So the owl does not like the Duo is not your friend. Interesting. So maybe it's polarized.
And that's why you are there with your app and you think, oh my God, for me, this is a horrible experience. But clearly it works for so many people. They love it, right?
Right. But it is interesting that in the case of Inner Intellect and Sublime, I think the audience it's a discerning audience that really is in it for the sake of the intellectual curiosity, right? It's like the pursuit of knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And, I just, I wonder, like, so much of the way we think about this on Sublime is like just slow compounding. But I do wonder, like, am I taking like, I'm open to being wrong about trying to take the moral high ground, if that makes sense.
But you can't, I always say we need more hubris, not less. We need people who say, and who will take the moral high ground and who will want to do things differently, because all new things come from crazy people who ask themselves, who the fuck am I to say that? And you still say it. And it's breaking those taboos, right? That always bring forth the change. But when you are talking about expressing yourself clearly, I always think about the fact that might just be that we're shy, right? We actually could express ourselves more clearly, but we feel like that would be cringe. Right? Like if I actually stepped on a soapbox and told people what I really think, what would they think? And the truth is what you just said, that they wouldn't even hear it, right? Like I would have to actually repeat it so many times and refine it so many, many, many times that eventually I probably would start making more sense. Permission, I think, is one of the most interesting things. And with AI, I'm building an AI tool as well right now. And I think about this a lot. The fact that people can't operate without permission. So we designate institutions, religions, individuals for the sole function of giving us permission, whether that's a therapist, whether that's a mentor, whether that's a parent. And their only job is to like reduce the stress and the guilt that we would feel if we felt that we are acting without permission. And of course, I think about, whether, for instance, AI will be able to like, if this really is just a transactional like moment between humans, can a machine do that?
It's a very interesting question, I think, because what you're getting to is the heart of like, what is freedom, right? If we can do anything, it's sort of like it's a different kind of prison sentence, right? And so I think people think that they want choices, but what they actually want is good defaults. Like the default of like, I was born into this religion or this and that. There was something about that was liberating in a way that we are just not equipped as a species to deal with the abundance of options that we have today. And I think like good options are a great thing. Like the fact that I like was born and raised in Bogota, Colombia, and I'm now like, like talking to this amazing woman who we met on the internet, and we're both building companies. Like that is agency. That is like, us giving ourselves permission to do the things that we want. And that's a privilege. But I do think that, it's like, well, it begs the question of what is freedom, because now it's like we are all sentenced to freedom.
And what is real choice and what isn't? I remember the very first time I started working on my own internet products was the time in 2016 when the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal happened, and people really, for the first time, looked into what social media was doing to our society. And one of the pieces of research that I was reading at the time argued that, for instance, the Facebook timeline that at the time was really revolutionary mess with people's understanding of exploration and exploitation. So obviously, for those listeners and viewers of ours that might not know about this, every brain is constantly seeking a combination of familiarity and novelty. Different ages, have a different ratio. Different personality types will want a different, proportion between novelty and familiarity. And what they argued, basically, the researchers in this paper 10 years ago, was that when you're scrolling these timelines, your internal sense of freedom, basically, like people compute their own sense of freedom, whether their familiarity and novelty mix is like a good fit for them, right? Like you want to be able to travel, for instance, but you want some familiarity with the airline, knowing that you will arrive, that it's safe, understand what's on your ticket, et cetera, right? So it's not just freedom. And apparently with these very all-encompassing social media environments that we now live our lives in, this sense of like the built-in sense that people have about it has somehow been injured, because you're constantly being fed something as new that is in fact always the same. And so the paper was wondering, and I'm going to look it up and put it in the YouTube description and the Spotify description here. The paper basically argued that this might actually mess with our brains in a sense that it hurts other areas of life as well. So when people are saying like, oh, people are not dating that much, or people in Europe, they don't want to travel anymore, et cetera, that it might be that some sense of internal freedom versus control has really been messed with in some fundamental way.
That is very interesting to think about, like just the way that this feeling of novelty is what you get as you're scrolling, and how that consequently makes the physical world or reality boring in contrast. How do you compete with like, it's like, I'm going to look at my son and he's the same. He's not shifting as I kind of touch him. So it has all sorts of interesting ramifications. I mean, one of the things that I think about that I think bodes really well for inner intellect is, I think one of the problems with social media is it is infinite. There is no like, there are no like bounds or constraints. It is just a feed that keeps going and leads nowhere. And I've become very obsessed with the philosopher Byung-Chul Han's work. He wrote this book, The Disappearance of Rituals, where he just like argues that the basically like the problem with our modern society is that we've kind of replaced rituals that by definition have like a finite sense of like space and time with social media, obviously in far more articulate and compelling ways. And I think that, you know, places like Interintellect, that yes, they have some sort of friction, but maybe that is productive friction because it starts to bring ritual back into our lives. And maybe, you know, even just to like stretch it further, I even think about some of the most, like as somebody building a digital tool, I've sort of like, you know, drank the Kool-Aid of the kind of software founder that, you know, this is a product with zero marginal cost. And so in theory, I should be doing things at scale because, you know, if I like, I don't know, record some sort of like, I don't know, go viral on TikTok, then that can reach millions of people. Like that is the kind of promise. But the reality is if I look like at what engages people and what's deepened our loyalty and like ultimately monetization, because that's what we're after, is like building a sustainable and, you know, cash flow generating business. It's the moments where we get hundreds of people in a workshop on Zoom engaging with these ideas deeply, where they're seeing how I use my library. And so, yeah, maybe to your point earlier, I do think like we may start retreating from some of these kind of unbounded spaces and look for more productive friction.
Have you read the new Nadia Asperova book about?
I'm halfway through.
What are your thoughts? Because what some of the things that you're talking about are this like anti-mimetic, like as I mentioned at the beginning, that you as well, it just as one person, you have this duality that some of the things that you do seem very mainstream, very mimetic, like people can pick up on it and remix, right? But some of the things that you do are very esoteric, and they are supposed to be because you're saying there's a cocoon on the internet that you can come in and be safe from the noise. So you seem like a person who has to, you know, balance between these two modalities. And I felt that at least toward the end, maybe you're not there yet, Nadia does bring up a couple of options for how to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I will have more thoughts when I finish the book, but it is interesting with the parts of it that I've read where she talks about how a lot of the great stuff happens in small circles behind the scenes. And then it's sort of like sometimes you see on Twitter how like somehow the tide shifts and something that was taboo no longer was taboo. And I think what I'm sort of picking up from the book is that's not an accident. It is a result of kind of like manufacturing and workshopping these ideas behind the scenes in a group. And then, you know, once you hit the public square. And so I think a lot of people that are unaware of the kind of like dark forest theory of the internet, of all of everything that's happening off of social media, like to me, it's just been very interesting to sort of validate the need to have these spaces where I'm like workshopping ideas with people like you know, that eventually, because I think some of these things like talking about ritual, et cetera, they're very early. Like, what does that mean in the context of software? It's not, you know, it's still not like we don't really have the language yet to talk about it in a mimetic way. But I think there is something to be said about being strategic and taking some of those ideas and eventually kind of making it to the public Times Square. But I'll have more to say. I don't have too many.
That's fascinating. And I'm curious whether, like, are you building Sublime to be conductive of this? Like, are these rehearsal rooms for a future public concert in your mind? Or do you notice maybe surprising uses of your app amongst your first users?
So it is interesting that, so one of my to me, basically like one of my favorite kind of ways of using Sublime is I think that I don't think when you produce great work, whether it's a piece of writing or something else, it rarely comes from having that thesis from the get-go. You usually just have some sort of hunch, and you need a way to develop that hunch. So, and sometimes you need a way to develop that hunch privately. I think before, like, you know, I think ideas start out very weak and fragile. And so in my Sublime library, at any given point in time, I have 10 or so collections of ideas that I'm workshopping. So for example, I'll give you an example. So Alex DeBranco and Alex helps us with a lot of creative initiatives. We just wanted to talk about AI in a way that felt more human than anything else we'd seen, that had the lens of human flourishing and, like AI without losing your soul. And so basically, we created a collection and it was just the two of us initially. We've brought on a few more collaborators now. And initially, we were just like every spark that related to that kind of thing that we were exploring, we would add to that collection on Sublime. Once there was enough of like a pile of mess there, I would then kind of stare at it and I said, wow, there's something here. And then I went and I found a sponsor to basically like sponsor a series, which we're going to release in the fall, where we're interviewing basically like some of our dream, like favorite people talking about like, AI and creativity and humanity. But it all started with, we have a feeling that this idea is not being expressed clearly enough in this way. Even now, as I'm talking to you, it still doesn't have like this very kind of like elegant frame, because I think that ideas reveal themselves as you go. It's never like, like the napkin moment is like, that's just the unfolding hunch. And so to me, Sublime is a great place to capture hunches privately with people, then publicly. It sort of can meet you at every stage of that evolution of ideas. And I actually think that one of the most like beautiful things that I've done with Sublime is every time I've published a few essays like on every the publication. And so one of them was on creativity over productivity and how we need to kind of shift our kind of like the paradigm for success has to shift from productivity to creativity. So it started with a Sublime collection. And then I published the essay. And of course, a lot happened in between as I was, connecting these ideas, et cetera. But once the essay is published, I think one of the most valuable artifacts is actually being able to share the raw material that inspired the work. Because I think so much of the internet is performative, and it's, it's sometimes more interesting to see not just what you think, but how you arrive at what you think. And so in some ways, I think Sublime is like perfectly positioned, I think, to just like help people reap the benefit and the value of these artifacts of humanity that we leave behind as we do this kind of creative and intellectual work, especially in a world where, yes, if you can prompt AI to create something for you, like that's commoditized. But the process itself, the journey that you were speaking to, the journey, like the climb of Mount Everest, it's the journey that matters. And so, there's so many ways to document that journey, but some of those artifacts are presumably on Sublime for a lot of people.
It's beautiful. I remember that piece about creativity and productivity, and I was so happy because I think you and I both started our founder journeys a little bit mired in this productivity boy world. And I think with Paul Millard and all the other creators who understood the limitations of that lifestyle, I'm so happy that that's becoming a little bit more mimetic. And there are more people thinking like, I actually want to see my kids grow up. Like I would like to meet them every once in a while. And that has to be okay. Like that has to be, or I want to have fun at my job. Like, things that used to be taboo. Or maybe I don't want to wake up at 5 a.m., unless I really have to. Maybe there are better ways of living, it's just, I feel like humanity always has to try out the most toxic stuff available and kind of like decide based on its own experience that, okay, this is as bad as we thought. Let's stop doing this.
Totally. I mean, no doubt. I think, I think we don't realize how conditioned we are by the tools and the set of rules that we live with, right? Like even just the small nuances of like, I use project management tools. And in project management tools, it's like this very kind of rigid of like, here's the project and here's the issues and here's the tasks. And I think that so many of the challenges that we have in the coming century are like resistant to that kind of like rigidity of like categorization and like mechanical, like all that stuff is so easy to automate now. But there's a lot that we do as humans that resists this kind of automation that I think we have been somewhat blind to. And I think so much of what I tried to argue in that piece and really try to kind of, like have like my feet on the ground as I was constructing that argument is that we need to construct like different tools to trigger the mindsets that are going to be conducive to the kinds of places where we can actually deliver value.
Yeah.
Because I mean, so much of our identity, I think, is subject to like existential risk, like in the coming decade. Like I think a lot of people are just feeling very, like me included. I feel like I did everything I was supposed to. I did the Ivy League thing. I did it well in my SATs. I got the job. I've checked all the boxes. But somehow the thing that I was told to optimize for was intelligence, but a very kind of very constrained definition of intelligence. It was about, analysis and kind of reasoning abilities and math and all these things. And I think a lot of those things are things that a machine that can now do better than I can. And so part of it is like me trying to like reckon with what does that mean? How do you find like dignity and worth when so much of what you were told was valuable and that you nurtured in yourself can now be done by machines?
It's almost like we're going through cognitively right now what we had gone through physically before, that no, you don't have to like plow the field yourself and you don't have to lift heavy stones by yourself. Like we can like figure out a way to do that. You can still build your house yourself if you want. And some people find satisfaction and a creative output in that. As many of my female friends attest, at some point, every man wants to build his own house. Like, let him do it. It's a much better hobby than a lot of other things he could be doing. But you don't have to, right? If you don't want to. And that's just kind of a beautiful thing. And I feel like the heavy lifting that was not the really fun part about thinking, the fact that I can outsource that might be a real creative revolution. And, but it will come with a lot of downsides as well, and a social rearrangement, as did the industrial revolutions and other, processes of kind of collective outsourcing or something that used to be done by humans.
It's a great analogy. I think like I can imagine people that felt like their strength was the thing that they derived their value from. And then it's like the Industrial Revolution happened, and now it's like your brain is what you derive your value from. And it's like, oh, now that so what is the next thing?
I had no idea what people would be doing with their days. Like you read all this commentary from like, what would women do if they didn't have to do housework all day? What would children do if they didn't have to work in the factories or as like paper boys? Like people had no idea. In the moment, you can't imagine then there's a better way of spending your time.
Totally. I mean, I think one of the easiest way to not be panicked about AI is to read history books, right? It's like the classic, like Plato warned about we were going to lose our cognitive abilities with writing because we suddenly just like could record things. And then even just like when books were a thing, people warned that like, oh, on the subway, people are just going to be reading books and they're not going to talk to each other. And it's the same arguments over and over again. So, I think
the moral corruption of women, right? Like we will all turn into these promiscuous harlots. If you touch a book that's not the Bible, there goes your morality.
Totally. So I kind of try to like avoid the moral panic of it all because I think the patterns are so predictable if you look at history that it kind of gets boring. But I do feel like there is such a vacuum of kind of leadership in the sense of like, oh, I'm not like, help me believe and be excited about the possibilities. Well, because I find it very kind of disheartening that we have an incredible technology in our hands, but we have an inability to understand how it fits into our lives in ways that get us excited. And I think, so much of it is because if you look at, Sam Altman and like, all of these kind of, even just like go on these websites, go on Anthropic and Gemini and, OpenAI and like their stated mission. Like I love, like, I'm a sucker for a good, like, mission page.
Yes.
Like their mission for the most part is like to get to AGI. Cool. Like, what's in it for, like, but like what is that? What's that going to mean for my kids? Are they going to have jobs? Am I going to be a happier person? Is my anxiety going to be quelled? Like, what is the, like, I just,
What the
I
AI fidget spinner, right?
right. So I feel like that's what's lacking. It's like, we've got this great thing. Help us navigate this like unprecedented technological renaissance. That's what I think we need. And maybe that'll come from spiritual leaders, from people outside of technology. I just think like, I love technology. And I think there's like a dearth of just perspectives from people that love technology, but want to harness it in ways that, kind of have like human flourishing at the forefront versus just technology at the forefront. Because so much of like AI these days seems to be AI for the sake of AI. Why are we building this? Oh, to get to AGI. Why? Because AGI is good. Why? Because it's a
like
technical breakthrough.
reasoning. Yeah.
Why is it a technical break? Like it's like a technical breakthrough for a bunch of men that have spent like their lives like doing this research.
Yeah, which is great, by the way. And then it's so funny how I love your comment at the beginning of this podcast episode where you're talking about like complaining in itself is kind of dumb. And I often find like Henry Oliver and James Marriott from the Times were just on Interact earlier today to debate, the future of or the death of English literature. And, at the group at some point realized that we're basically all millennials. And the people who today argue that people are no longer reading books basically grew up watching television nonstop and then kind of socialized into Tumblr and Wikipedia. And we somehow still found time to read a bunch of books. And it's just so funny how somehow it's always like 10 years ago was the normal thing and 10 years from now will be the apocalypse. And it's just so, there's a pattern and nothing changes.
Totally. It's like we romanticize and assume that people used to read a lot more than they actually did. It's in some ways, I always think, and I talk about this with my team all the time, even from a product perspective, as we continue to build and design the Sublime user experience, we sometimes are kind of, still hold like some of these kind of early ideas. And I always say nostalgia is the enemy of progress. You have to like be willing to let some things go. So yeah, I think that there's something.
This podcast came out from this 2x2 that I created and against the public nostalgics, who in many cases, and this is true for millennials, like we had it good, right? Like people who argue against social media, like I made my career and most of my friends on social media. I come from the middle of nowhere, Central Europe. I'm a philosopher. I did not do the Ivy League thing and a lot of other things that, get people maybe a little bit of easier access or used to give people an easier access into certain areas of American society. And I had social media whereby I could just show who I am and my brain and my work ethic and my mission. And people cared. And then I could build my career. I love my group chats and I love my anti-mimetic spaces and Interact and, in a variety of like offline environments. But I would not be able to get started there, right? Like they are a secondary layer to things.
Totally.
And so we do need some kind of public solution to like enable association, because without free association, you don't really have a democratic society. And if you don't have a democratic society, you don't have social mobility.
Totally. I think
you have an aristocracy where if you were born into the right group chat, then you will be able to succeed.
Yeah, it's funny. Venkatesh Rao, who I think has some of the kind of most interesting ideas on some of these themes, he said something around, on the vein of complaining is boring. He said something about you can manage your anxiety and beat the house without resorting to basically like, yielding your agency to social media platforms. Like Mark Zuckerberg is not responsible for your agency. If you are like, you can use social media to further your goals, or you can use it to become a couch potato that does nothing but scroll. And it's on you, and you can complain and assign that responsibility to somebody else, or you can kind of take matters into your own hands. And, there's obviously all sorts of perspectives, but I think it is important for me personally. It's been important to remember that, because I think it is easy with social media, especially when you just described like how amazing it is. But the reality is that you go in there and you are surrounded by people that appear to be a lot more successful than you, that appear to be reaching their goals faster than you. And so now it's not that I'm no longer comparing myself to my classmates in my school where I was top of my class. I'm comparing myself to the rest of the world. And so I think a lot of the challenges are human challenges, right? It's one of the things that Sam Altman has said that I think is so true is it's surprising how we pretty much passed the Turing test, but the experience of being human remains pretty much the same. It didn't make a dent in our lives. Yes, I can draft some emails faster if I get AI assistance, some things but like for the most part, like my toddler was crying this morning because he wanted the blue plate instead of the red plate. AI is not going to change that, So I just, I think that if you were to ask me, like, what's going to be different 10 years from now, it's like nothing.
The core human experience just doesn't change, right? Even if your girlfriend is an AI, your feelings will be the same as attachment and excitement and disappointment. To kind of close off this episode, I have a maybe sensitive question, and you're very welcome to say, oh, I don't want to talk about it. But because we decided at the beginning that this was going to be founder therapy, I will try. So you tweeted recently that you had a kind of transformative psychedelic experience and went a little bit viral with it, with a lot of people providing input. Do you maybe want to share a few thoughts on this? I'm so curious, and also curious how the kind of integration process has been working. Like, this has been a couple of weeks ago. So how are you?
Oh, well, yes. I'm happy to talk about it a little bit. So I did a psilocybin mushroom ceremony. I took a high dose, 4 grams, and I had never done anything before. So this was my first ever experience with mushrooms. I did it. Well, I have a very close friend that had been kind of planting seeds and saying that I would love it. And it had been kind of percolating in my mind for a while. But then one day I just felt very called to do it. I had some questions in my life, like personal, family, work. And I sort of, what's most surprising about my experience is that I went in with one intention, and it took me somewhere completely different and unexpected, but also beautiful. So I'm not going to get too deep into what it did, because it's just like very kind of personal, like family stuff for me. But what I think was so like earth-shattering for me as a brainy person who lives inside my head and reads a lot is that the what I experienced was not some earth-shattering insight. Like, had you told me, hey, this is like your truth, or this is what matters to you, I would have said, like, yeah, that makes sense.
Like a printer that kind of presses out a page and
presses out the page.
Is 42. Goodbye.
Right. But it's like, so I think to me, the difference is like, this was like the knowledge was injected into my veins. It was so kind of beautiful to experience in such a profound way that knowledge is not what changes behavior, right? It's like, we've all had like that, marriage counselor that has a shitty marriage, or, like all sorts of examples like this in life. And so, I don't know.
I started to write the How to Be Happy books, and then you meet them and they seem clinically depressed.
Right. Like the career coaches that had a miserable career and like have never actually had a happy career, but they pivoted to advising you on your career. Like, the world's just full of all sorts of things like this. But I don't know, to me, just the kind of understanding that there is a kind of like plant wisdom that I can tap into was just very, very new to me. And that's why that tweet was just like, holy fucking shit. I cannot believe that I've lived my entire life inside my head when there's like wisdom that is like in the body in very different ways. And I just think that that is something that everyone should experience at least once.
And this episode was sponsored by the American Mushroom Society. No, I'm joking. But this is wonderful. And I think I love Kate Hall. She comes she's coming on the podcast in a couple of weeks, and she talks about how, to go back to the limits of expressibility, sometimes you have a great deep spiritual experience that can come from a moment in your private life, that can come from psychedelic explorations, that can come from a religious experience, a ritual. And the more real the experience is, the harder it is to explain, because you sound like a crazy person or like an extreme cliche fridge magnet. And
Totally.
that's just so, I think it's so important to try to explain them, because as your curiosity was kind of tickled by your friend talking about it, there is a kind of pass along the good news when it comes to these important things. And the more we feel shy, or the more we feel that, oh, this is so obvious. No, there are people to whom it's not obvious. When it
totally. I mean, the reason I felt so compelled to share is because I actually am the opposite of woo-woo. Like, there's not a lot of woo-woo stuff in my life, and I am open to the possibility.
Yeah.
But in general, like, I've tried meditation a lot, and I still, I cannot quiet my mind. And so there's just a lot of things that I want to experience and believe, but I'm pretty skeptical. Yeah. And this was an experience where I was like, wow, this is for the skeptics. Yeah. And I think a lot of my friends and the people that know me, when they saw that I shared it got them so excited, because they didn't expect coming from such a rave review of the mushrooms.
That's amazing. I think Tiago Forte also shared a similar story, that, he also comes from this very analytical place. And it's so interesting to me that he has done multiple interintellectuals and is a person that I respect tremendously. He talks about how he learned how to not put down the analytical self, but to outsource it. And this whole thing that he built, the second brain, is from this, just put this burden out into your environment, into good systems and a good library and good logging. And then you don't have to carry it all the time, right? Because our brains are like, when you're holding 7 packages, you're not going to dance ballet if you're holding them. You have to put them down. And I feel like Sublime is similar, right? Create another location for this collection than your brain, so that your brain can, like a little bee, can fly on and collect more things.
Totally. I mean, for my relationship to Sublime is like insurance for my mind.
That should be your tagline. I love it. Insurance for your mind. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think in general, our brains are for having ideas, not for storing them. Our memories are really bad, but I think so much of here's one of the things about the state of the web today is that, because of the business model of social media, if you think about it, if you wanted to find an old, Instagram post, Substack even post of mine, tweet of mine, the search is so bad. Search is real, it's keyword based, and they under invest in search.
I have my best tweet ever and I can't find it. I think it's a glitch, because I remember it and I can't find it.
Right. Well, if that's we have invested so much in search on Sublime, because so much of the spirit of creating is finding the right idea at the right time. It's being able to surface. And I mean, we just launched our Twitter bookmarks integration, and we haven't actually announced this on Twitter, but it's that same thing where Twitter has this feature, but they've underinvested in helping you actually revisit or find these things, because now with AI, it's super possible, but the incentives are not aligned. And so I think, there's all of these people that kind of trash the productivity, second brain stuff, because I think there is a portion of the space that was more interested in organizing than in making stuff. But our orientation of Sublime is the opposite. It's, it's how can we help you leverage this beautiful repository of ideas to make more things. And the hero feature is really, you're saving one idea, you're discovering related ones from other people's libraries. And it's one of those things, as you said, that you have to kind of experience to understand. But yeah, I think so much of my job over the next decade, because I think it's a decade, is repeating and repeating the same ideas many, many, many times over. And I think if we keep doing that consistently, the results will speak for themselves.
Sari Azout, amen. You bring to my mind the beautiful layouts on Tumblr when you could just go to your archive and see everything you've ever posted in one and just find what you were looking for. Maybe someday that's going to be Sublime. I hope that, maybe through some API connection, I will be able to search for my tweets, maybe on Sublime, and help me arrange them around themes. There's so many places to go. Thank you so much for joining us today. You're amazing. And people use Sublime, feel Sublime on Sublime. It really is something extremely special. And also, I think, Sari, you have one of the most exciting founder stories out there. And people should follow you as a really exciting, like old-timey newspaper column where the heroine checks in every week to tell us what she's up to now. You're always up to something amazing. And we're so lucky to be witnessing you on your journey. Thank you for everything you do.
Anna, you are amazing, and the admiration is mutual, and I am just so happy that we're on this journey together.
And by the way, guys, you have a series on Intellect, right? Is that still going?
I don't know when this will go live, but the last episode of my series is happening later in July. So hopefully,
okay, we will try to ensure that this goes live before that.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, and thanks, guys, for listening.
Thank you.